So this lecture series was established in memory of one of our beloved faculty members here at the School of Education. So it has special meaning for a lot of us who had the chance to get to know Jeff before he passed away in 2019. Jeff was an investigator in the early childhood arena. He worked to make a difference in all of his work for children in urban schools, particularly in Baltimore City. And as a faculty member here in the School of Education, he did the same for PhD students. That is, he really wanted to and had an impact. So today, as we gather to hear a distinguished visiting scholar address post-high school educational trajectories across the nation, we're also celebrating Jeff's legacy, that of a brilliant researcher taken away from us far too fast, who dedicated his career to improving the educational trajectories of Baltimore's children. The Grigg Lecture is also co-sponsored by the Johns Hopkins Population Center, which brings together social science, public health, and biostats to inform research in poverty and inequality, sexual and reproductive health, and family, maternal, and child health. The lecture is made possible through a special award created by Jeff's father, Douglas Grigg, and the Grigg family. And I know that Lael Grigg, Jeff's widow, wanted to be with us here today to participate in this lecture. Unfortunately, she can't make it, but she certainly has been appraised of what we're doing here and has been and continues to be incredibly supportive of our work here in the School of Education. The Jeffrey A. Grigg Award is presented each year to, and I quote, a PhD student who demonstrates excellence in Baltimore-focused research. The award consists of a research stipend, as well as an opportunity for the recipient to choose an outside speaker for this annual lecture, which I believe he did in this case. And the product of that is what you're going to see today. The 2024 recipient of the Jeffrey A. Grigg Award is Avery Davis. Avery, yes, thank you, Dr. Avery Davis. Avery, whom you'll hear from in a moment, is someone whose character and focus entirely suits the letter and spirit of this award. I should know, I served recently on Avery's dissertation committee and sat through a wonderful defense. I don't know if did you think it was as wonderful as I did? Okay. So in his doctoral studies, Avery used quantitative methods and large-scale data to investigate how ethnic and economic minorities navigate higher education. In addition to the Grigg Award, his thesis was supported by a National Academy of Education Spencer Dissertation Fellowship, and his recent research had previously been supported by the Rand Corporation and the Gates Foundation. Avery holds an MA in Liberal Studies from the City University of New York and a BA in Music and Chinese-Japanese Studies, which is what everybody does, music and Chinese-Japanese studies together, right? From Valpo, where he was Phi Beta Kappa. And most recently, he earned, as I said, a PhD from the Hopkins School of Education. Prior to his doctoral studies, Avery served as the director of the President's Office and Board Management at Concordia College, New York. And now I'm pleased to share that he is the incoming, as of next Monday officially, the incoming Chief of Staff for the Senior VP of Development and Alumni Relations at NYU. So I'm going to turn the podium over to Avery, and he's going to take it from here. But congratulations, Avery.
So thanks, Dean Morphew, for the kind introduction. I also want to doubly express my gratitude to the supporters of the Grigg Award, as well as the Hopkins Population Center, who are co-sponsoring today's lecture. My job is simply to introduce our distinguished guests. Dr. Jennie Brand and I met last fall in August at the ASA, American Sociological Association Conference, during an author meets critic session for her book, which you're going to hear more about. And so her book, Overcoming the Odds, the Benefits of Completing a Degree for these students. And so one of the things that I think is important to talk about in setting this up is that higher education has a lot of conversations going around, whether it's the value of a degree is worth it, whether we should continue to invest, should we go forward with more state divestments, who does a degree pay off for? And so thinking about these long-term trajectories, Dr. Brand has spent her career researching social stratification, inequality, and so she's particularly poised to address this topic. And As you know, she's professor of sociology and statistics at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she also is co-director of the Center for Social Statistics at UCLA as well. But what you may not know is that in 2004, she completed her PhD at the University of Wisconsin in sociology. And in 2014, 10 years later, Jeffrey Grigg completed his PhD in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so here we are 10 years yet again in 2024 as she delivers the Grigg Lecture. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest, Dr. Jennie E.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm grateful to be here as a fellow Wisconsin graduate with Professor Grigg, and someone also who shares his commitment to the study of educational stratification. So this book was the culmination of about 25 years of studying college pathways and outcomes for disadvantaged students, including many collaborative studies over several decades. So I benefited from the wisdom of many, many people along the way. And I seldom give a book talk. This is my first book, so I have way too many slides, but I'll try to cover what I can about the book. So I begin the book describing Nick. So Nick had a high likelihood of completing college. His parents both attended college. His father worked as a general manager. His mother worked as a nurse. Their family income was in the top quartile of the income distribution. Nick attended a high school in a large metropolitan area with high income, high achieving students. He felt in control of his life. He expected to go to college, as did his friends, and his parents supported his aspirations. He enrolled in college prep courses, performed well in high school. Just as he planned, Nick went to college after high school and completed his bachelor's degree in 4 years. Caleb had a low propensity of completing college. Neither of his parents went to college. His father completed high school, but his mother did not. His dad worked as a mechanic. His mother worked as a cleaning person. His parents' income was below average. Caleb attended a disadvantaged school, mostly Black and Hispanic students in an urban area in the Northeast. He scored in the top quartile of the test score distribution, yet he didn't enroll in college prep courses. In high school, he didn't expect to go to college, and he didn't have friends who aspired to go to college. Overcoming the odds, Caleb completed a college degree. Throughout the book, I compare the trajectories of people like Nick and Caleb. I describe their social origins and their life outcomes after college from their mid-20s through early 50s. And then I compare the trajectories of people like Nick and Caleb to matched counterparts who don't complete a 4-year degree to describe possible alternative trajectories and better understand the benefits of college across the population. So let's consider what we know about the benefits of college. So we have considerable agreement that college impacts a range of life outcomes. College graduates are more likely to be employed, have higher earnings, higher household income, higher status jobs, high quality jobs. They're less likely to be in poverty and receive social assistance. College is associated with family stability, social connections, civic and political involvement. But despite a lot of these recognized benefits in the literature, there's still some discourse that insinuates limited returns, particularly for those students who may be variously deemed ill-suited for higher education, unqualified for higher education. College doesn't pay off is a claim casually expressed in news outlets or possibly in conversations you might hear, or we may hear assertions that too many students are going to college, or college is not for everyone from different constituencies. Some of these constituencies question the value of college degrees when they contend many graduates are unemployed or they're employed at low-wage jobs after college or facing student loan debt. But what does it mean to say that college doesn't pay off or too many students are going to college? How do we determine whether it pays to complete a degree, doesn't pay for which outcome and for whom? Who are the college-worthy youth who are excluded from some of these assertions that college doesn't pay off? Who are the supposed college-unworthy youth? What would students have done had they not gone to college? Generally, claims like college does not pay off or too many students are going are aimed at students on the margin of school continuation, sometimes labeled low-achieving students or students who struggle to afford the cost of college, which overlap with high proportions of socioeconomically disadvantaged and racial and ethnic minority students. Rhetoric about college access, somewhat unsurprisingly, perhaps often doesn't carefully consider what is required to speak knowledgeably about the benefits of college degrees. So to evaluate the benefits of college across the population, first we want to know what an individual's life would look like in the absence of a college education. We want to know that college counterfactual. And too often comparisons are made that in news outlets, conversations that don't draw on counterfactual reasoning. And we want to determine which benefits of college we consider and how these various benefits differ across the population. So too often also the rewards valued in both public and some academic debate begin and end with jobs and wages. When we expand our conception of college benefits, we get a more balanced understanding of how the impact varies across the population. And we should consider benefits beyond the individual and how benefits accumulate over the life course. So I want to talk you through the book as well as I can. There are 9 chapters. Chapters 1 and 2 provide some background. 3 is more the conceptual, methodological setup. 4 considers unequal selection into college. 5 through 8 give the kind of main results on variation and the effects on socioeconomic, family, and civic outcomes. And then 9 concludes. So in chapter 1, I describe educational expansion as a key feature of U.S. society for over a century. So employer and student demand drove educational expansion alongside investment of public resources to meet that demand. We had the founding of many public 4-year colleges and community colleges, along with other policies to increase access to disadvantaged students, and that helped facilitate an expanding student population. Post-secondary expansion shifted our collective understanding of who college was for by successfully increasing access to previously unserved populations. And as education expanded, the economic impact also correspondingly increased. And as such, access to schooling has become more critical for occupational attainment and upward mobility. So the increasing returns to college are a result of both high wages for college graduates and less educated workers, increasingly precarious economic positions. Despite the increasing returns to college, the educational transformation in many ways stalled in the latter part of the 20th century. The U.S. has seen increasing college enrollment alongside some stagnating 4-year completion rates. And a significant hurdle is public disinvestment, the limited expansion of educational capacity, rising costs. A college degree has never been more critical and it's never been more expensive. As students of color attended college and universities in historic numbers, we've seen larger cuts to those institutions that they're most likely to attend, places like a state system in California. The disinvestment in higher education has thus occurred alongside growing diversity on college campuses. So then in chapter 2, I first summarize research so I give that backdrop. Then in chapter 2, I'm summarizing the research that suggests these considerable and often largest economic benefits for disadvantaged college graduates. So I first describe 2 theories about heterogeneity in the effects of college. The theory of positive selection is that individuals invest in their human capital, like acquiring more schooling because of expected returns on that investment in the form of lifetime earnings minus costs. And then people choose college only if the economic benefits, the returns, outweigh the costs. Labor economists may take this theory to imply that individuals who benefit most from college are the most likely to attend. And those who are most likely to attend tend to be students from the most advantaged backgrounds, like Nick, who I showed. Now, alternative theory is negative selection, that individuals who benefit most from college are the least likely to attend, like Caleb. This theory is based on research that college going is governed not only by rational choice or these economic motivations, but structural conditions and cultural and social norms and circumstances. And that advantaged youth face fewer risks in pursuing higher education, whereas disadvantaged youth have to overcome considerable odds to attend college, and education is riskier in social and economic ways that may demand more economic justification, and we see a larger return, which I'll keep describing. There's a lot of evidence about suggesting a pattern of negative selection. So several studies in economics over the last several decades have used instrumental variable models that suggest that students on the margin of school continuation have larger benefits than average students. And recent studies by economists and education researchers have tracked large samples of students and continue to observe this pattern, and noted that this holds across different data sets, different instrument sets. In my earlier work, Yushia and I found that students with an estimated low propensity of completing college had larger effects of completing for wages for several life course stages and for 2 cohorts. And then the negative selection pattern is also consistent with a large literature in educational stratification, where effects are stratified by different covariates. So some studies find that racial and ethnic minority and low-income students, who generally have a lower propensity for completing degrees, experience larger returns than white or high-income students. For example, recent work in economics finds that college has notably large returns for groups from poverty backgrounds and for Black students. Some other recent work also suggests, however, that there might be both large wage returns for low and high propensity college goers. This is including work I've done with Siwei Chang, Shang Zhou, Yushia, and Mike Hout. And while the positive and negative selection theories connote kind of a linear pattern, this work finds evidence for a curvilinear pattern. We do, however, continue to observe a large effect for disadvantaged graduates. So to make sense of some of the findings suggesting the large benefits for disadvantaged youth, I've drawn on research on social mobility. So Mike Hout, Florencia Torsch, Fabian Pfeffer, others have found evidence that education can equalize socioeconomic destinations across social origins. Work by Raj Chetty has also described a similar pattern for selective college attendance. So as we see from the figure here, there's little direct relationship between origins and destinations for college-educated workers. In other words, college acts as an equalizer. I'm allowing for some slope to indicate some remaining association. But by contrast, we may have a strong relationship between origins and destinations among less educated workers. Mike Hout famously stated, this finding provides a new answer to the old question about education's overcoming disadvantaged origins. The college degree can do it. But a higher probability of attaining a college degree is part of the advantage in high status origins. More recently, economist David Deming stated education really can be an economic equalizer, but right now it only is so for a chosen few, and I think that really needs to change. If we If we change the perspective and consider the returns to college, that is, consider the effects rather than the levels, we see that a college degree for individuals with low social origins can really narrow that gap of disadvantage. So that's the effect there. While a college degree for those with higher social origins is less consequential. There's some debate about how strong the equalizing impact of college is, given possible differential selection into college. Shang Zhou and others have recently questioned this, but even if we allow for some more slope among the college-educated workers, we may still generate a pattern of higher returns for those with lower socioeconomic origins. It just is the relative position between the less educated workers. So it doesn't actually need to be the case that college fully equalizes destinations to be, for the return to be greater. And again, it might be that there's some nonlinearity here and that we should allow for a more flexible representation of these relationships. So what are some of the factors that contribute to this pattern? First, substitution. So the educational system might substitute for family in acquiring productivity-enhancing network connections, economically rewarded cultural orientations, valued in the labor market. The privileged youth already have access to a lot of the social capital and networks, while those from less privileged backgrounds are getting something they may not have had access to before. And labor market prospects, so the particularly poor prospects for workers with low levels of education combined with low levels of other forms of labor market capital, social, cultural, might generate this pattern of disadvantaged outcomes. Average incomes have stagnated for, in real terms, for people with high school education in recent decades, and more disadvantaged youth are particularly vulnerable to these conditions. And selection. So disadvantaged students may be more positively selected into college. This is a theme I return to repeatedly. So when a person unexpected to go to college based on observed characteristics, the low observed estimated propensity goes, there's potentially this strong self-selection, or maybe economic self-selection that's involved. So the decision to go to college among children from advantaged backgrounds with high educational expectations may be dictated less by that self-selection component. And that was part of the theory of negative selection. Also related to selection, disadvantaged low propensity college graduates may require more economic justification to attend and may be more motivated to generate an immediate economic payoff. So some work by Stephanie DeLuca and colleagues has found that disadvantaged youth don't have the luxury of exploration in their 20s. They're seeking expediently to discover a means to financial security. So they may be selected on that, that type of economic motivation. The final emphasis on this chapter is about which outcomes we should consider. So much of the discussion of the benefits of college focuses on wages. We have a strong narrative that we educate our youth to enhance their position in the economic order and secure the nation's economic future. Early educational reformers, Jefferson, Du Bois, Emerson, Dewey, others advanced broader benefits, including enriching civic society, promoting democracy. And with educational expansion came some greater questioning of the purpose of education. Exploration was deemed acceptable for privileged youth, but the less privileged, increasingly filling seats in college, must attend to their economic demands expediently, so goes one narrative. But given the diversity of educational goals, we should be mindful of the overwhelming focus on economic returns, which can impoverish our conception of the value of college for different groups. Within the category of socioeconomic returns, we should consider returns other than wages. So for some students, avoiding low-wage work, circumventing job instability, poverty may be key. And we should consider how the effects of college extend to families and communities. Moving beyond a narrow focus on wage return is a key consideration for constructing this more accurate and holistic narrative about the value of college across the population. And we may have negative selection for some outcomes and not for others, or college may serve as an equalizer for some outcomes and not others. We want to consider how college shapes these different outcomes and how it does so over the life course, not just what happens after a few years after a degree is earned. So in the book, I consider a range of socioeconomic, family, civic outcomes. I consider the way college both increases outcomes like wages and household income, and the way it decreases employment, low-wage work, poverty, and so forth, and the way it increases traditional family structures, but decreases other outcomes, how it decreases social assistance and increases civic engagement. And I consider outcomes over a long period of time over the life course for two different cohorts. The data used throughout the book are from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, 1979 and 97 cohorts who've largely completed their degrees in the early 1980s and 2000s. The NLSY respondents were 14 to 21 in 1979. I restrict to the 14 to 17-year-olds. for the 97 cohort, there were 12 to 18 in 1997. We have extensive measures of demographic characteristics, family background, so forth, and data on outcomes of interest. And the data are excellent response rates for longitudinal nationally represented social surveys. Assess the effects of college of a four-year degree completion by age 25, and for some of the analyses for four-year college attendance by age 20. The college experience differs for those from different social class backgrounds, so that we have some college experience heterogeneity by social origins. I don't focus on the college experience heterogeneity except in some of the narratives I described, but rather focus on college effect heterogeneity across 24 outcomes and various axes of heterogeneity. It's not a lack of interest in exploring these other dimensions of the experience, but more a lack of space. Yeah. So in chapter 3, now I describe the importance of counterfactuals and as the formulation of the problem and understanding variation in the impact. Counterfactuals are meant to orient the reader to reflect on the possible life conditions in the presence and absence of college while acknowledging that they're entities we can't directly observe. And I describe how common comparisons in public discourse and some social research fail to draw on counterfactuals and can result in misleading conclusions. This first, and this is probably the most common, some compare the outcomes of so-called high-achieving college goers to or low-achieving college goers to high-achieving college goers, or the outcomes of low-income or racial and ethnic minority college goers to high-income white college goers. One New York Times article, for example, contended that most people, and the most people was those who don't score high by some threshold on tests, should not attend college. And the comparison was to students with high test scores. It's not drawing on counterfactuals or how they would do in the absence of college, and there are no outcomes actually observed. Others who criticize affirmative action programs or state that some students are mismatched on college campuses or contend that some students would be better off with vocational training, compare experiences between disadvantaged and more advantaged students, and don't invoke these kinds of counterfactuals. And I review various other examples in the books. Some social science work notes, importantly, that white college graduates earn more than black college graduates. Scholars often use this evidence appropriately to enforce anti-discrimination laws in hiring and promotion. But we don't want to draw on that evidence to suggest that college doesn't pay off for black students. And some other work that points to unequal college experiences across social origins. Also, we don't want to use that to suggest that disadvantaged students don't benefit from completing degrees. So we don't want to conflate college experience heterogeneity and college effect heterogeneity. Then I compare others compare low-income college goers to middle or high-income high school goers, which becomes an even more confounded comparison. Again, not drawing on counterfactuals and returns. And some compare outcomes for current graduates to outcomes for graduates from a prior generation. Again, not drawing on counterfactuals. In this case, even if we assess returns, whether the return is higher in 2024 than it was in 1980 or 2000 doesn't invalidate the return in 2024, and we know that returns have increased. In each case, kind of the comparisons obscure the logic of research on causal effects. Outcomes described are often not long-term life chances, usually very proximate conditions, and they seldom encapsulate the broad benefits. So I just caution against this type of reasoning. And then describe how we estimate effects and drawing on potential outcomes. And I think I'll skip that and to keep getting through to results. So we consider two potential outcomes. The values of some variable y, let's say it was poverty, that would be realized in the presence and absence of college, and have the key unconfoundedness assumption that we need to make that college and non-college groups are comparable with respect to factors that occurred before college and are related to the outcome of interest. And this is just now a simple directed acyclic graph of the effect of college, where college now is W and outcome is Y. We have a set of X factors that influence both W and Y. The measurement of theoretically meaningful confounders renders the assumption more plausible, but not necessarily true. So I then describe some of the estimation strategies. I'm going to draw on a propensity score matching approach. And I do this for the book's purposes because it provides a very intuitive look at the comparisons that we make between someone who completed college and someone who didn't, like Caleb and Isaiah, and compare their outcomes. And then I also use a sensitivity and robustness checks, a generalized random forest, and a doubly robust inverse probability weighting method. So I describe the similarity of the results in the book. Most of the matching results are very similar to these other approaches. And whether we use any of these approaches, matching or machine learning methods, the possibility that remains that some unobserved confounder influences college completion and subsequent outcomes. I also considered several possible instrumental variables, but they had a minimal impact on whether a student completes college. I draw on the instruments, however, when comparing the vignettes of these selected cases, and then use sensitivity analysis to assess how large this unobserved factor U might need to be to invalidate some of the results that we see. So to construct a measure of the propensity of college, I use an iterative approach outlined by Guido Imbens and Don Rubin, which bears similarity to a machine learning algorithm, but it's more of a white box approach. So these are the steps. We kind of use a baseline set of covariates and then iterate through all the possible additional terms and then every possible interaction and higher order term to end up with a final model. So this ends up correlating really highly with the random forest and other machine learning algorithms for estimating propensity scores. Ravaris Moore and Tanvi Shinkri and I produced a Stata program. If you wanted to use this approach, it's IT P-score for iterative P-score. And then, so here are the covariates used in the specification. Several other measures were considered, didn't reach the threshold for inclusion. Some of these are several different variables. And then there's something like, I think for the NLSY 79, there are maybe 13 interaction terms and a higher order term. And for college completion, I do this separately for college attendance and completion for each of the two cohorts. And then eliminate units with no common support, so such that there are no college or non-college graduates with no comparable college or non-college or college graduates. That means that we're largely eliminating those individuals with limited infrastructure to attend and complete college, and those whose prospects for college were largely secured. Okay, then in chapters 5 to 8, I employ these various strategies to uncover sources of effect heterogeneity. So I'm comparing first an average treatment effect to a treatment effect on the treated. If the treatment effect on the treated exceeds the ATE, the average treatment effect, those most likely or more likely to complete college have larger effects than the average student, and likewise the corollary, if the ATE exceeds the treatment effect on the treated, those less likely to complete college might have larger effects. I also subclassify average treatment effects by estimated propensities. Here divide into low, middle, and high. The interaction with the propensity score offers a straightforward approach to assess how the impact of college varies by selection into college, estimated selection, while also directing our attention to heterogeneity in that selection process. And it allows us to make simple summary statements about the unequal distribution of scarce resources and how those are related to the benefits of those resources. Within each stratum, I use matching or the generalized random forest or doubly robust approach, and then do a smoothing differencing non-parametric method. So this is for college and non-college graduates. I'll fit and plot separate local polynomial regressions of the outcome on the propensity scores and take the difference between the two. So this allows for a more complete assessment of how effects differ across the likelihood of completing college. It also allows for possible nonlinearity in effects And the first step also enables us to see the degree to which college equalizes outcomes across the likelihood. And then I compare effects by race, parental income, mother's education, and test scores, and also use a machine learning approach to uncover responsive subgroups based on causal trees. So it may be unclear which of the large number of possible joint covariates and thresholds are of interest or best to consider prior to analyses. So these machine learning methods based on decision trees allow us to explore sources of variation that we may not have considered. And they're a widely used supervised learning algorithm. It's recursively partitioning the data by covariates into increasingly smaller subsets where the data bear greater similarity. So I've developed a recent paper I published with several grad students in sociological methodology that outlines this approach. And then to contextualize all the quantitative findings, I construct these matched vignettes using data from the NLSY 79. And so I select a white, black, and Hispanic male and female college graduate with a low and high estimated likelihood of completing college. And then for each selected college graduate, I select a matched comparison to serve as an individual specific counterfactual. And these provide these stories that I tell throughout the book. I have 4 possible matches using nearest neighbor matching, and I choose one of those. I choose cases between the 25th and 75th percentile of each of the within that propensity score distribution to avoid cases at the tails. Choose college graduates based on their individual treatment effect for a few selected outcomes so that they can be kind of representative of what we're seeing in the quantitative results. And then I drew on some Corson strata to match on parental income, quartiles of test scores, and among the low propensity graduates, selecting ones who differ with respect to one instrumental variable. So follow the lives of these 24 individuals from adolescence to midlife, describe their family background leading up to college, and then the characteristics of and all the outcomes following college. So in chapter 4, I describe factors that influence selection into college. In summary, as you'd all expect, we have patterns such that more disadvantaged students have a lower propensity of college. And we see a larger proportion of those with a low propensity here who grew up in low-income families. This is for the NLSY 79. I'm going to show mostly the results for the 79 cohort, but the results for the 97 cohort are very, very similar. And so lower income students relative to the high propensity students who have far more high income students. And more low propensity students had less educated mothers. And in the more recent cohort, we have more educated mothers generally, but the patterns look the same. And racial disparities across the propensity of college completion. So now this is Black, Hispanic, and white. And these patterns look similar across each of these. These are now test scores from the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. So for the low propensity, we're seeing students with lower test scores, proportionally lower test scores relative to the high propensity. Here we have higher test scores. Okay. So now in chapter 5, I should look at my time. Oh dear. Okay. In chapter 5, it'll actually go fast through chapter 5 through 8. In chapter 5, I consider the differential effects of college on a broad range of socioeconomic outcomes: unemployment, time out of the labor force, low wage work, low skilled work, employment instability, and all the outcomes correspond roughly to 25 to age about 50, and then LSY 79, 25 to 35, and then LSY 97. I'm not going to cover the average effects here. I'm just going to show you the variation in effects and just for the 79 because the outcomes are very similar. So let's return to Nick and Rich and Caleb and Isaiah. So as you said, Nick and Rich have a high propensity of college. Nick completed his degree, Rich didn't. Rick serves as Nick's match control case, and Caleb and Isaiah have a low propensity, but very similar. They had similar backgrounds to one another, and differ with respect to an instrumental variable. So what happens after college? Nick worked as an accountant throughout his career. He was continually employed after college. Saw steady wage growth up to about $170,000 annually in his late 40s. Rich worked a few jobs as a bartender in his 20s, but in his late 20s he began working as an engineering technician and then as a civil engineer through his late 40s. Rich, like Nick, was continuously employed, eventually making about $110,000. We observe these notable returns between the two of them. So college appears to be associated with a wage advantage for Nick relative to Rich. Now, if we look at Caleb, he worked as a ticket agent, then became an air traffic controller in his 30s and 40s. His wage climbed to about $100,000 to $120,000 annually at the high. He was continuously employed through his career from his 20s through age 50. Isaiah worked a series of jobs in his 20s as a carpenter, then as a sales clerk, then an upholsterer, then as a wood furnisher, then a warehouseman. He worked as a carpenter again. His wage eventually rose to about $60,000 in his early 40s until he lost his job. He was unemployed in his mid-40s. A comparison of the career outcomes of Caleb and Isaiah suggests also a considerable return to college. We don't see complete equalization between Nick and Caleb, but we do see proportionally a large return for Caleb. So here are the matching results for wages by propensity score strata. This is age 25 to 50, and then LSY. For wages, we see large returns. And this is suggestive of that somewhat U-shaped pattern I was describing. So large returns for the more disadvantaged low propensity graduates, and some large returns for the higher propensity graduates as well. And these are now over long term, and we see a lot of wage growth for those high propensity college graduates. There's a stronger pattern of negative selection for women. I'm combining both here, as there are a lot of axes of heterogeneity we're looking at, but the pattern looks more U-shaped for men. For this smoothing differencing method, and looks like the green shading there is missing on the right slide for some reason. Sometimes things don't transfer over. But so I eliminate the tails of the distribution, and the 5%, the highest 5%, and the lowest 5%. The highest 5% are some of those really high earners that were impacting the U-shaped pattern. The figure on the left show these levels for college graduates in blue and the non-college graduates in red, and that's based on local polynomial smoothing. The x-axis is the propensity of college in both cases, and the y-axis here is the average log of wages over the career, and on the right side it's the effect on the log wages. Most of the larger effects for the high propensity, was more of these high earners. That's why we don't see as much of a U-shape. And other methods for assessing variation in effects kind of confirm these patterns. So I'm just showing two ways of looking at heterogeneity. So we tend to focus on how college cultivates advantages, focusing on wages. It's important also to consider how college can circumvent disadvantage. So Nick spent no time unemployed or out of the labor force and didn't hold a low-wage job throughout his career, nor did Rich. So we don't see a notable effect of college on that outcome between Nick and Rich. Caleb spent no time employed or out of the labor force and less than 10% of his time in a low-wage job. That was early in his career, in his 20s. By contrast, Isaiah spent about a third of his time unemployed and time out of the labor force, about 40% of his time in low-wage work, actually 80% in low-skill work. So the comparison suggests that college may not prevent Nick from socioeconomic disadvantage in the same way that it might impact Caleb. Unemployment and low-wage work are also equalized between Nick and Caleb, but quite dissimilar for Rich and Isaiah. So the results here by propensity score strata for unemployment and time out of the labor force. Here the y-axis is reversed, so the larger bars represent a reduction, college reducing effect on low wage unemployment and time out of the labor force. And so we see these largest returns for the low propensity college graduates, smaller returns for the high propensity. And these patterns don't differ between men and women. The same is true for low wage work and low skill work. Here, a 23% percentage point reduction in low wage work for the low propensity compared to a 9% reduction for high propensity. Likewise, for low skill work, I show a similar pattern for job instability. And the pattern's the same across the two cohorts. So then we also see some more relative equalization in unemployment. That's for college graduates relative to non-college graduates, and more of this negative selection type of pattern. There's nice green shading on my screen, but it's missing there. And this is for now for the time out of the labor force. Whoops, again, a kind of a gap here that generates that larger effect on for the low propensity and more equalization for the college graduates. And this is for low wage work, similar pattern, and low skill work. So we see more of this equalization for these outcomes. And these plots look remarkably the same across the two cohorts. So if we move beyond earnings and then consider a number of these dimensions of socioeconomic well-being, we draw a potentially, more straightforward conclusion, at least regarding the negative or positive selection theories and equalization across life trajectories. So college may not fully equalize wages, but it may equalize unemployment, time out of the labor force, low wage work, low skill work, instability. And I also consider sensitivity analyses, and the results are reasonably robust to unobserved confounding. I stratify also by selected characteristics, and those pretty much parallel what we're seeing here. So low income, lower test scores, those with less educated mothers, Black and Hispanic college graduates all have these notably large effects on reducing these socioeconomic measures, reducing disadvantaged. And I apply the machine learning models that search for responsive subgroups, college graduates whose mothers didn't complete high school and who grew up in large families and report low social control, are often those who have notably large effects on reducing time spent in unemployment and low wage work. These results support some more recent work by Jim Heckman and colleagues on the so-called, as he calls, non-market benefits of college, that he finds that those with low test scores have the largest returns for a number of dimensions outside of wages, a feature that he says the returns to education that are missed if we only look at market benefits. Okay, the other three chapters kind of parallel the approach of chapter 5, and so I'll just go through them quickly and show that. So here's another now set of cases. Alana and Sydney are both Black women with a high likelihood of college completion. I go through and describe the similarity of their background, which looks very similar, but Alana completed college and Sydney didn't. And then compare them to Chantal and Imani, both are Black women with a low propensity of college and also had very similar experiences before they attended college. And then describe their family outcomes. So I look at household income, family poverty, marital formation, number of children, and single parenthood. And here we have a comparison between Alana and Sydney, suggests a marriage benefit potentially that is associated with college, higher household income, but likewise for Chantal and Imani, although we tend to end up seeing larger effects on marriage and household income among the high propensity. So these are the results now for household income. See more of this U-shaped pattern, but higher effects, and some of that is the assortative mating that occurs, and which is strong for high propensity graduates, the likelihood of marriage, and high status spouses is also higher for the high propensity. And that's roughly what we see here along this continuous axis. And this is for married by college by propensity. And then, though, if we look now at family poverty and single parenthood, we see few differences between Alana and Sydney. Sometime in poverty for Sydney, Chantal and Imani have a much larger difference, and that's what we see when we look at the patterns for the matching results. So family poverty, much larger effects for the low propensity, and single parenthood for the low here and the mid propensity. And we have this equalization of poverty across the propensity of college relative to that gradient for the less educated. And I think that was ever in poverty and single parenthood. Okay, so while the more advantaged college graduates achieve socioeconomic success along family families, less advantaged achieve socioeconomic success more at the expense of forming families, or at least those that include children. But women like Chantal and many others I look at in the study avoid poverty and low-wage work, as well as single parenthood. And by these measures, Chantal's life looks more like Olana's than Omani's. Okay, I also look at reducing social assistance, so I'll just quickly go through this set. We have another set of comparisons, and here again, the difference between the low propensity graduates suggests this larger reduction in assistance received. And that's what we see mirrored here for the matching results. These are the effects on any assistance received, and then on the assistance amount received. And that's true for each form of assistance that we consider these large effects for the low propensity graduates. And we see more equalization across college graduates for any assistance received. And this is also true for the more recent cohort. And when I use machine learning models, it actually identifies people with a low propensity as being most responsive to college. So that's AFDC, TANF, SNAP, SSI, and unemployment, and the social assistance amount. And then finally, in Chapter 8, I consider the effects on civic participation and community and youth groups and voting. So here Nancy and Rebecca both report volunteering and voting. We don't see a difference here between them. And here now Brian and Henry are low propensity graduates. You see more volunteering and more likely to vote. For the effects on volunteering, we actually see for any volunteering, the largest among the middle propensity, and that was coming from some of us were civic and then the charitable volunteering. For educational volunteering and also for civic, we're seeing these large effects for the low propensity. For voting, we see this pattern of negative selection such that the low propensity are the most likely to increase their voting behavior. And some relative equalization across volunteering and voting. Okay. Should I summarize? Okay. Let's see if I have a moment to summarize. So So in summary, what do we got? So for more advantaged students, we see these large and increasing wage growth, high household income, formation of stable families. For more disadvantaged students unlikely to attend college, I observe those increases in wages and household income, civic involvement, but also find very notably that college significantly circumvents low wage work, unemployment, job instability, family poverty, social assistance. And college graduates like Chantel and Caleb, Brian, Brenda, Diego, Daniela, others who I discuss more in the book, grew up with many circumstances that rendered them unlikely to complete degrees. Yet in doing so, a lot of their life outcomes bore little resemblance to their matched counterparts. College also enriched the lives of Nick and Nancy, Olana's lives, and others I study, but it wasn't associated with circumventing precarity and poverty. By these metrics, their lives resembled more their counterfactuals. So the findings suggest meaningful ways that college impacts both individual and societal well-being, particularly for unlikely graduates, and a lot of these equalization patterns that we observed in these slides. So this is just giving a sampling of some of those patterns we saw. So the aim in the book has been to elicit consideration of what a person's life might look like in the absence of a college degree for the college-going population. We can never know this for certain, and there's potentially bias in some of our estimates, and so we often ask, is the bias worse for unlikely college graduates who overcame the odds to complete degrees? I feel like I should skip over this so that I'll have a moment to have more of a concluding slide. So this is more about the unobserved selection and critiques about unobserved selection, and some comments about the robustness of the findings and sensitivity results that we used, and so kind of the widespread evidence about the benefits for unlikely graduates. And then I also describe evidence suggesting negative selection in the distribution of lots of other scarce educational resources. So have a range of different things that we've seen, patterns of negative selection outside of looking at the effects of completing degrees. And so then some concluding comments. So implicit in much of the discussion of college access is who deserves a spot at our nation's colleges or whose children are implicated in possible limits to educational expansion. So I argue those who question the value of college often, at least implicitly, assume that college is a right path for some students and potentially the wrong path for others, but the justification should by no means be that the students don't benefit from college. College can be transformative, and it's especially impactful for students whose social origins rendered the odds of going low. And insinuating limited benefits can reinforce these existing inequalities. How we present the purpose of education, it impacts how we progress as a society. So I argue against the narrow focus on economic returns, and reducing the role of education to economic pursuits also leads to defining education as a private rather than a public good, which can limit public support. And we should consider a wide range of benefits. And I think that's, finally, declining state support has long-term implications for societal well-being, and today's students are receiving less social support than prior generations. And education and expanding education not only broadens prosperity, but also enhances our communities and strengthens our democratic society. So, sorry I went long, and I'll end there.
Maybe one or two signaling questions?
Sorry. Oh. Hi, thank you so much for this. So a question I've had while reading some of your work and being here for this lecture was, I feel like so much of the cost benefit analysis that goes into college, regardless of what background you come from, is the debt that you come out of it with. And not just personal debt, like familial debt, right? Like what did your parents sacrifice you to there? What is the debt of your immediate surroundings and your community, right? So is there any way that you factor in, it's like graduates from unlikely backgrounds starting really in a hole, right? Even if you're making a higher wage relative to what you were, catastrophically so, like as we saw in some of your comparisons, you have 20% of that income is also going to support your family or friends because you have to, and people from more affluent areas didn't. Like, how is that sort of factored in? Well, I'm saying, how do you factor in people from unlikely graduates having more debt to negotiate once they do leave school?
Yeah, so it's not, I didn't end up showing it, so I at one point looked at debt. So at one point I tried to look at debt as an outcome. There's not a great measure in the NLSY, so I didn't end up going with it. But even looking at debt, we see a big benefit for college graduates. So we'd have to think about there's educational debt, but there's other forms of debt, and a lot of students who don't complete college are also accruing debt in other ways. So long term, I mean, and it may be the several years after college, some of these students are acquiring debt that is difficult and is making life difficult, and maybe they're even have a low wage job for several years. But over the long term, over the 25 years that we're looking at least for this cohort, we're seeing the benefits for all these different outcomes, for the kinds of jobs they hold, the accumulation of earnings, and I think all of this ends up such that we don't see them having higher amounts of debt.
So you should feel free to tell me if this is not as interesting as I think it is. But when you were showing all of these graphs, there's a lot of them that have, it looks like an inflection point at, like, I'm guessing from the graph around 0.25 in the propensity score, right? It looks like sort of flat and then bumps up, and that's sort of why you see a lot of the negative selection. And I'm curious what you know about that inflection point. Have you figured, like, is there some sort of categorical difference that's leading to changes there, or am I making a mountain out of a molehill?
I think below, so it may not have come up, but on some of the slides, I have a point that shows that the average propensity score is actually a 0.2. So it's pretty low. Yeah, so right at that point, we actually have a lot of cases who have a low propensity of completing college, and these are the most disadvantaged. But it does kind of like curve, and that's why we're allowing for the curve, which if we're assuming some linearity, it would just smooth out there. But I think in some ways it becomes the cases who have a higher than 0.2 roughly propensity and who don't complete college are actually among the more advantaged, cases. So much of the data are falling within that, under that threshold.
Thank you. I saw on several of the slides 4-year college. So I assume that that you're treating, you're not looking at 2-year colleges or other kinds of programs. But I was curious whether you looked at any distinctions between 4-year, issues of selectivity or other kinds of, and if maybe you didn't. But I'm just curious if is 4-year college a single treatment, or did you differentiate between that in any ways? And if so, what did you find?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of heterogeneity within the treatment condition. So kind of on both directions. So among the low propensity graduates, they have different trajectories that lead them to college, and their match counterparts are more likely to not go to any college, and some of the low propensity are more likely to go to a 2-year college and transfer. Among the high propensity, you have on the other kind of dimension that might impact the results, they're more likely to go to a more selective college, go straight from high school, complete in 4 years, and their counterparts are more likely to have attended maybe a year and then not completed a degree. So we have kind of heterogeneity going on in lots of dimensions here. So it's not the same treatment. There's definitely differences in the treatment. I have gone back and forth on whether focusing on college attendance, which actually results in more heterogeneity, because then the high propensity are attending but also getting degrees, and they're also getting often advanced degrees, versus selective college attendance, where there's less heterogeneity but also a different kind of treatment that is more selective for the low propensity graduates. So kind of struck a balance in the middle here. And in other work I've done, I've looked at differentiating different types of college attended and looked at college attendance versus completion. I tried to keep kind of both of those in there, but there's definitely a lot going on. So I kind of made the decision to end up focusing on a lot of different outcomes and a lot of axes of selection into college and heterogeneity in that respect, and exponentiate the analyses to try to bring in some of this more experience heterogeneity.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Brand, for providing this talk today. And if you all could just join me one more time and thank you her for her time today.